My name is Caitlin. This incident happened when I was 14 years old, and I will never forget this memory. One day, I was at home alone at my house. My mom was still at the office late at night, and my two siblings were at my grandparents' house, which was kind of far away from my home. At first, I was just enjoying my time alone watching Netflix and doing some fun stuff. However, after a while, I got pretty bored. So I decided to invite some of my friends over. I asked my mom for permission, and then told my friends to invite them over. A few moments later, while I was waiting for them, I heard a loud bang upstairs. I was sure that there was no one else upstairs, so I stood up and looked up the stairs with an anxious look on my face. When I was near the stairs, I could see that one of my dolls had fallen. I picked it up, and when I straightened my back, something caught my attention. A little girl was standing upstairs. Well, I could feel that she was staring at me, even though I couldn't see her face clearly due the darkness. I was terrified. And then someone rang the doorbell. I ran to see who it was, and luckily my friends had arrived. Thank God. It was a moment of relief that my friends came over at the right time. Soon, I got my mind off of the girl I saw. We sat down in the living room and had fun talking with each other. An hour later, one of my friends suggested that we should take some pictures together. So we gathered around one another. We took several selfies while laughing and chatting. Later, as we scrolled through pictures, we found something. There was a little girl standing behind our couch. What made us even more terrified was the fact that she had no face. Her face was just an empty darkness. No eyes, no nose, and no mouth. Being terrified, I told Cassie to delete that picture right away. However, she said that something was wrong with her cell phone. I snatched the phone out of her hands and tried to delete it, but no matter what we tried, we couldn't delete the picture. Then we heard loud thumps. Sounded like someone's footsteps were coming from upstairs, and our light was flickering on and off at the same time. We thought that we couldn't stay inside anymore, so we rushed outside in a hurry. One of my friends, Christina, suddenly pointed at my bedroom window and said that there was someone in there. I raised my eyes up and followed her finger, and there she was. It was the same faceless girl we had seen in the picture, my friends. And I screamed. I called my mom and explained everything. My mom couldn't believe what I told her, so she made calm down and said that she would be home in 5 minutes. After she arrived home, she searched the entire house, but she couldn't find any trace of the girl. I hoped that it was just our imaginations. However, we soon decided to move out of the house because I kept seeing the girl. After that incident, we finally moved. And from then on, my mom never wanted me to be home alone, so I always stayed with my siblings. I still have no clue why the girl haunted me, but I think it was because she wanted us to get out of the house. Well, I'm just glad that I don't see that girl in my new house. This happened to me while I was on my way home one night. I was living in an apartment at the time. When I arrived on the first floor of my building, there was a piece of paper hanging on the wall that said that the elevator was out of service. No, not again, I said to myself. I lived on a pretty high floor, so without any other choice, I had to walk up the stairs. I was walking up the stairs out of sheer desperation, and all of a sudden, I heard something. Then I began to feel uneasy. I knew that crimes often occurred around my neighborhood, especially targeting people who were alone. When I listened closely, I could hear a pair of men's shoes and a pair of women's high heels walking at the same time. I assumed that it was a couple. You guys are having a hard time like me. I'm struggling to walk up the stairs, especially this late at night. I thought to myself. I sighed with relief and turned my head around. However, I will never forget what I saw at that moment. There was a man who was crawling with a pair of men's shoes on his feet and a pair of high heels on his hands. He was crawling towards me. This happened a few years ago in the neighborhood I grew up in when I was around 6 years old. There was an incident where an old man who lived right in front of my house was murdered by a robber. Not only did the robber steal all his money, but he also stabbed him brutally with a knife and then ran away, according to the police. The crime scene was as horrible as it sounds, and unfortunately, to this day, the robber still hasn't been caught. When they moved the old man's dead body and passed by my house, my mom covered my eyes with her hands so that I wouldn't see it. Nevertheless, I could see my neighbor's face through the gap between my mom's fingers. After that, even after a few months had passed, the old man's house wasn't sold. It was because there were a few strange rumors spreading around the neighborhood about his house. Some said that people would always hear the old man's coughing and sobbing coming from inside whenever it rained. 10 years later, all of the people who moved into his house had to leave. And now his house is being used as a warehouse. When I was in high school, I was crazy about a boy band and used to stay up late at night watching their videos. Because of this, I used to fall asleep at around 3 or 4, and the town I lived in was sort of a new city under construction. So it was really quiet, and there was no one outside during that time. One night, it was around 3 a.m. I suddenly heard a woman singing outside. It was an old song, and the strange thing was that the woman was singing just one part of the song over and over again. She didn't move on to the next section. She would just start singing, pause for a minute, and then continued singing again. Out of curiosity, I opened the window and was about to sing the next verse of the song to surprise her. However, before that, I sent a text message to my friend. Hey, someone is singing outside and keeps repeating the same part. LOL, should I sing along with her? Not long after my friend responded. And then I had to shut the window quietly because I was terrified. The text said, don't do that. That's a ghost. When ghosts find someone to harm, they first sing and then wait music. This happened not long after we moved into our house in 2003. It was a nice and big house, which was made in the 1950s. One day, I was in my backyard watering the grass, and then out of the corner of my eye, I saw something that made pause. There was a man standing next to the shrubs near our backyard's wall. He was dressed like a carpenter. His head looked like it was tilted sideways, and his body was slightly facing our fences sideways. Then he saw me and smiled kindly at me. At first, I thought he was fixing someone's house and that it was his job. However, only after he faced me, I realized that wasn't the case. When I looked at him with narrowed eyes, I noticed that his neck was visibly broken, causing his head to awkwardly tilt the side. I then saw that he waved at me once, but I was too shocked to scream at the time. After I regained consciousness, I looked around, but he had vanished and had literally faded away. 2 nights later, I woke up at 3 a.m. Noise was coming from my ceiling. It sounded like someone wearing construction boots was walking very slowly. I started to freak out, thinking that it might be a thief. However, I suddenly realized that that part of the roof was so thin, which meant nobody could walk on it. The steps abruptly stopped after a while, and when I felt at ease, I heard another horrible sound. I heard a sharp scream that sounded like a man, then a loud thud, as if someone had dropped on my ceiling, followed after I covered my head with a blanket. My hands and whole body shivered. And after 10 minutes of nothing, I peeked outside. It was completely quiet. I saw, entered nothing. But I couldn't fall back asleep that night. The next morning, I started to look up the history of the house. To my surprise, it turned out that there was a report about the carpenter I met a few days before in the backyard in 1958. He had been hired to fix the roof while the owners were on vacation. However, the carpenter had fallen abruptly through the weak spot on the roof while he was working and had broken his neck. He couldn't scream for help, and no one ever knew what happened to him, as the owners were gone for 2 weeks. He was finally found when they came back, but had already died. Music. This happened right above my bedroom. Suddenly, I felt bad for the poor guy, and I guess he's still looking after things. Since then, I've seen him sometimes, but I'm no longer afraid of him. Music. This story is about when I first moved to the city and joined the company. Our company was running a dormitory at the time, and I was the one from the countryside, so I decided to stay in the dormitory. One day, after work, I came back to the dormitory and was eating my dinner with the TV on. It was almost midnight after working. Over time, I was laughing and watching some comedy shows. And then I felt a sudden strangeness. Like it feels like someone is staring at you, feeling weird. I turned my head toward the window, and I couldn't move as my whole body stiffened with a tremendous chill. I couldn't even scream. The woman's face was stuck in the window as I turned casually to look, and she was staring at me without any movement. Now, let's think about it. The windows in the dorm were not even small. It was just the size of a normal person's upper body. But look, a face big enough to fill that size of a window. Can you imagine what it was? And what was scarier was, I was on the 5th floor at the time. How could she even stand over there staring at me? I was frozen. I couldn't run away. I could only just watch her glaring eyes. It was lucky that I could move as the ghost disappeared the moment someone knocked on my door. One of my coworkers in the next room came to my room saying that he had something urgent to do. And when he looked at my pale face, he asked me if I was okay. So I explained to him what I had just saw. And then his face looked a little stiff. Well, he didn't say anything anymore. But I knew it. I was sure I'm not the only one who saw her here. Anyway, something strange has happened to me. Since then, sometimes when people get together and talk about ghost stories, I suddenly start to feel nauseous, like ghosts are coming to see me. For example, one day I was with my friends in a restaurant, and as soon as they started talking about ghosts, my skin turned pale and I started sweating all over my body. At first, they thought I was lying or trying to prank them. But when I looked at the door with a serious look on my face and told my friends not to keep telling those stories, they all had to shut up. I think something's wrong with me. Thank you. So anyone who's watching this story, I hope you guys always check out the window, especially when you're alone in your house. Always I used to live with my grandmother, who died a few years ago. My grandmother had suffered a cerebral infarction during her lifetime, so she couldn't use her arms or legs at all. And she couldn't even speak her. She could only mumble and grunt. Because I spent a lot of time with my grandmother, I felt sorry for her whenever I saw her. One day my family gathered together at my house to celebrate a big holiday while we were eating delicious food and chatting with each other. My grandmother was sitting alone in her room. A few hours had passed, and it was time for everyone to go home, so my relatives said their goodbyes. However, my grandmother was still in her room at that time, so I stayed with her. I sat next to her, just in case. "Grandma, do you want to go outside and say goodbye to everyone?" I asked, looking at her face. Then Grandma slowly turned her head towards me and opened her mouth. I'm embarrassed. At that instant, I couldn't believe that she spoke with such clear and accurate pronunciation. A few years later, after my grandma had died, I told my family what happened that day. I was at the funeral hall, but no one believed in me today. I'm going to talk about a story that I read somewhere a few years ago. A body was found in the countryside. It was especially difficult to identify the victim or the perpetrator of that incident because the body had been dead for quite a long time. And to make matters worse, the bones had changed and were bleached. However, the police found one strange thing in this difficult situation. Only one finger from its body remained completely intact. They asked the National Forensic Service, and they finally completed the identification on the body's finger. Furthermore, they succeeded to arrest the criminal. As a result of the investigation, it turned out that the assailant was her roommate. They said that he'd beat her to death on a rainy day and buried her in the mountain behind their house. After that, the detective who was in charge said in his interview, "When you're in charge of a case, there are often things that occur that can't be explained. However, I can tell you that ghosts really exist." I'll admit that what I'm about to tell you is not that creepy. My grandmother passed away not too long ago. After staying 3 days in the funeral home, we were supposed to go to the cemetery following her cremation. They said it would take about an hour, so my mom told me to take a nap in the car until the cremation was done. Since I was the one who had to drive later, I went back to my car alone and fell asleep. However, not long after someone started shaking me, I heard my name. I slowly opened my eyes, and my grandmother was sitting next to me. "Grandma," I asked, rubbing my eyes, and she smiled at me. "Yes, it's me. Your grandpa is calling me. I'll go first, so stop sleeping and get up." I really missed her. Crying in my dream, I suddenly woke up with a surge of longing for her. I kept crying and then came out of the car. At that moment, I saw my family walking towards me, carrying a box of grandmother's ashes and her picture. I immediately told my mom about my dream, and then she patted me on the back and said this, "I guess Grandma wanted to say goodbye before she left. Maybe you were the only one who was sleeping, so she wanted to say goodbye to you." Music. Foreign, I was looking for internet cafe because I needed to send a few emails. I spotted one in an old building. The sign said it was on the 6th floor. When I walked through the entrance, there was a dark hallway that led to a small elevator. I pressed the call button, and when the doors opened, I stepped inside. In a lot of Asian countries, many buildings do not have a 4th floor. The number 4 is considered bad luck. because the word for sounds almost the same as the word for death, when to stop. And the doors open, I was about to step out, when I realized that something was wrong. The hallway was in total darkness, mother lightning from the elevator. I could make out a random piece of furniture, covered with white cloth. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. I thought I might have gotten off on the wrong floor, so I checked the buttons. None of them were lit up. There was nothing to indicate which floor I was on, and I noticed something moving at the end of the darkened hallway. I couldn't quite make out what it was, but it looked like a person dressed in some type of girl. The figure was moving slowly down the hallway towards the elevator. They creeped me out. And then I panicked. I started pressing the closed door buddy. All of a sudden, the light in the elevator flickered and turned off. I was plunged into the pitch darkness. I was so freaked out. I almost wet myself just as I was about to lose it. Completely, the lights flipping back on the doors closed the elevator, dotted back to life, and began to ascend again. I breathed a sigh of relief when the doors opened this time. I was at the internet cafe. I went over to the counter and told the girl who worked there and what had happened. And she listened. Her face grew pale. She said that some of the customers and a few of her coworkers had experienced the same thing. She had never experienced anything herself, but she told me about the history of the building. Apparently, the 4th floor had been a hair salon at one time. It was prospering and doing pretty good until one of the women who worked there killed herself in the salon. What this line continued to operate, but they were plagued by weird and unexplainable events. Sometimes, when customers were having their hair washed, the water were turned as red as blood. Other people claimed that when they looked in the mirror, they would catch glimpses of a ghostly figure standing behind them. When they turned around, there will be no one there. Because of these events, the salon developed a bad reputation and began to lose customers. Eventually, they were forced to close down. The building's owner tried to rent the 4th floor out to other businesses. But when they found out what had happened, nobody would take it. Finally, the owner reduced the price to nearly nothing, and it was rented by a businessman who planned to open the stationery supply store. However, when they tried to do some renovations on the floor, there was a series of mysterious accidents. The workmen's tools would sometimes disappear, only to be found in the strange places. A large mirror suddenly shattered when nobody was near it, and the workman had his hand crushed when the elevator closed unexpectedly. Eventually, the workmen were so spooked that they refused to continue. The building's owner gave up trying to rent the 4th floor out and just shut it down. He had the buttons in the elevator replaced, and it was reprogrammed that nobody could go on the 4th floor. At least, that's what's supposed to happen. For some reason, when people took the elevator, it was sometimes stop on the 4th floor. And when the doors open, some people would see a figure coming toward them in the darkness. I honestly still don't know what that was. Foreign music. I had the same dream several times. In these dreams, I used to see an old lady who kept running after me. She was wearing Korean traditional clothes called a handbook and put her white hair up whenever it happened. She was kind of far away from me, so I tried to run away from her at full speed. But then, when I turned my head around in less than 3 seconds, she had already reached me and was right behind me with an angry look on her face and stretching out her hand. so I always woke up crying when I felt like I was going to get caught by her. That horrible situation repeated over and over again. Whenever I had a dream, however, the interesting thing was that I never got caught by her in my dream. Because I was so young at the time, it was really scary to see that old lady in my dream, so I tried to not fall asleep. But eventually, I couldn't win, and sleep took over my body. And the same thing happened again in one dream. I was playing at the playground with my older brother. We were playing with some dirt. And I could see the old lady watching us as usual. To be more specific, she was staring at me run hurry as soon as I told him that she ran towards us. But this time, she looked even more angry. Usual, I was in a hurry, so I yelled at my brother to go up on the slide. And we both ran towards it. I was going to go up the slide. But suddenly, I stumbled and fell down. As she was approaching, I was about to scream. But to my surprise, she just passed me. And then she angrily grabbed my brother's leg with one hand and pulled him downwards. Being terrified, I cried and yelled at her to let go of him. And then I suddenly woke up. When I woke up, I realized that my whole body was drenched in cold sweat. A few days later, an unforgettable and unbelievable incident happened to me. My brother was in a car accident, not to mention his teeth, cheekbones, ribs, right leg, and shoulders were all smashed. It was just horrible. But since the accident, I couldn't stop thinking of the old lady who I'd met in my dream. Well, it's been a long time now, but I still remember her face so vividly. Since my brother's accident, the old lady was no longer in my dreams. However, to this day, I'm still really curious. Why did the old lady appear in my dream? And what did she want to say to me? Music. I'm someone who goes on a deep and dark web constantly. It's not what people think. Words evil and overpopulated with crazy people. That's only a small percentage of the dark web. Years ago, my girlfriend broke up with me, and I put her personal information on the forum. And soon after that, she disappeared. It's been a while since that happened, and I've ran into people that have disrespected me. Since I'm not an intimidating guy, nor do I look intimidating, nor do I ever have physical or verbal conflicts, I always think to myself that these people don't know what could happen to them. I work at a fast food restaurant, and at the time of this story, my manager was really on my case about everything. I will be late, mess up orders, have an attitude with customers, and some other stuff I could name. But it's so much I understood that I was messing up. But the tone that this guy would talk to me embarrassed me in front of my coworkers, and sometimes in front of customers. One day, though, that was the last straw. So one day, I walk into work 5 minutes before I was due to clock in, and my manager out loud said that the window liquor is finally on time in front of customers and my coworkers. Everyone laughed at me during my whole shift that night. He would direct smart comments toward me while still yelling at me for everything that I did wrong. I made up my mind. I was going to find that forum and give his information on my walk home. I was going back and forth with myself about whether to do it or not. By the time I made it home, I made up my mind. I didn't shower, nor did I change clothes. I went straight to my laptop, and I searched. I possibly clicked maybe 100 links, because on a dark web, there are links that will take you down any rabbit hole. A link named Pork Chop pique my interest. When I clicked it, I was directed to an About page. It only says 6 words: we find it, we chop it, and another link that said, here's an example of what we do. I clicked it, of course. As soon as I clicked on it, the picture went to the point of view from an old school camera with the date and time in the corner of the screen. The person behind the camera approached the man and followed him. A few minutes go by, and the man noticed what was happening. He turned around and approached the camera while yelling and screaming at the person for following him. Then all of a sudden you see 5 huge guys dressed in black wearing a pig mask, one from behind a man, and drag him into the dark. The person holding the camera turns the camera to his or hers face and leaves it there for about 5 to 10 minutes. That person also wore a pig mask, but all you could hear was the man screaming and sounds that I don't want to describe in the background. The camera was then turned back around, and the sight that I saw was disturbing. It was something that no one would ever want to see. Some people say that they wouldn't wish it on their worst enemy, but I did. After the video was over, there were links. One said pork and the other said chop. I clicked on the pork and it prompted me to put in a code. I didn't have one, so I backed out. So I clicked on chop. There was information that needed to be filled out, like name, height, description. In place, filled out all the info for my manager. In a place, it was my job. I submitted the form. At the end of the screen, it said, see you soon. 4 days later, while at work, my manager approached me and decided to apologize for the way he treated me and offered to give me more hours and said that he will work with me more often because he sees potential in me. A few hours later, it was close to the end of the night. My manager helped me with the trash and took it out for me as I were putting chairs on top of the table, getting ready to mop. I looked outside and saw my manager looking over at something, but he looked worried. I moved to get a better look, and I saw what he was looking at was surrounded by 6 people in a pig mask with weapons in their hands. I ran outside as they swarmed him, except for one person. He had a camera. I forgot all about these guys. And then I put his information on the website. I ran outside as they approached him. He looked at me for help, but I ran back inside and called the police. It took them 10 minutes to get there. When I looked back outside, what I saw was the most disgusting thing I've ever seen. I wish I could get the image out of my head between the time of me initially seeing them calling the cops and running back outside. These guys were gone, but my manager was still there. I went to his funeral the next week. The next day, I received an anonymous email that had the whole video. They were watching him this whole time. He was on shift. I don't know how they got email. I never provided any of my information. Till this day, I still feel sick because my manager was starting to be nice to me that day. I can't go back on the dark web. Just hurts me. This happened over 25 years ago, but the memories are still fresh on my mind. I moved in with my boyfriend, who was a musician, and I wasn't working at the time. Our budget was small, so when we were offered super cheap rent for our house, we jumped at the opportunity. It should have been a red flag at the time. We were in no position to refuse. It was far from the city center. We had almost no furniture and lived quite the frugal life, but we were happy to have our own space. The house was simple, but cozy and nice, and there was another room in the backyard with no windows. but only a chair right in the middle of it. Needless to say, it was super creepy. So I avoided that part of the house while my boyfriend was working all day in a music school. I took care of the house in the beginning. Everything was fine, I felt happy there. But after a few weeks, weird things started happening one day. I put some of the cans and ingredients on the kitchen table while I was cooking. However, when I turned around to grab them, they weren't there at first. I just thought that I had forgotten to pick them up from the shelves. But when cans and knives started showing up in random places in the house, like the bedroom, I started paying more attention. My boyfriend also experienced the same things. And whenever he found the missing items, he just laughed about it. However, things started to change and took a turn for the worse when we decided to clean the backyard. We cut the grass, threw away the trash, and decided to move the chair in the middle of the room. So my boyfriend picked it up and left it in front of the house to be collected. He told me that he felt sick the moment he entered that room. I thought he was overreacting. But when I entered it, I immediately felt a heavy weight on my chest and a piercing headache. However, everything would be fine again once we left that area. It was scary. So we went to a local church, got some holy water and salt from the priest, and cleaned the room. We thought that everything would be okay. Now my boyfriend had to leave for work, and I continued cleaning inside the house. But I didn't feel calm and perky as I usually did, because I constantly had the feeling that someone was watching me. I even checked the doors and windows to see if there was anyone around, but no one was there, and I still felt uncomfortable and was paranoid all day. When my boyfriend returned home in the evening, we started hearing noises coming from outside. This area was kind of dangerous, especially at night, so my boyfriend was super careful when going outside. He thought that it could be a robbery. Everything was all right, except for the fact that the chair was back inside the room. It was in the same place as before, so he got really mad when he saw it, thinking that some punk was playing a trick on us. He went outside and decided to grab the chair, break it, and throw it away. But I could see the panic on his face when he couldn't move the chair. For whatever reason, it was completely fixed to the ground, not like it was glued to the floor, but more like it weighed 10 tons. No matter how hard he tried, it wouldn't move, because he had to come up with another plan. He ran inside, grabbed holy water and salt, made a circle around the chair, and started praying. Suddenly, we heard a loud bang. Thousands, maybe millions, of cockroaches started coming out of every sewer hole outside of the house. I am terribly terrified of cockroaches, so I guess this was my worst nightmare. He left the chair, and we rushed inside the house. And after we checked everywhere in the house, we locked all the doors and windows, and then ran away to my mom's house. As the incident happened on a Friday evening, we decided to stay at her house until Sunday to calm down. On Sunday afternoon, we returned home, and everything fell to normal. There were no traces of insects around, and the chair was still in its place. But the house seemed quiet. We started relaxing a bit. And as I had just refilled the fridge on Friday with groceries, I decided to start cooking something nice for dinner. However, when I opened the fridge, I saw an image I will never forget. All the food was full of maggots, and it was almost completely decomposed. The smell was horrible inside. I have never seen anything like it before. I mean, the fridge was still on, and seemed to be working. But the food was not frozen, and this level of decomposition could not be reached in less than 48 hours. It was the most disgusting thing I've ever seen, I screamed, and showed it to my boyfriend, who also couldn't understand what happened. But there was nothing we could do with the food or the fridge later. We finally decided to give the house back, and we moved out to another city. And fortunately, I've never experienced anything like that again. But that incident still gives me the chills. Music. A few days ago, my dad lost his shoes at a restaurant. When he checked the CCTV, he saw that an old man went outside wearing his shoes. At first, my dad decided to just think that he made a donation. But the next day, a package arrived at his company office. As he opened the box, he saw a new pair of the exact same shoes that he had lost the day before. And the sender was unknown. Let's think about it. My dad lost his shoes just yesterday. But when he checked the delivery date, it was dated a few days ago. Dad was just satisfied with a new pair of shoes that he received, but my mom and I are still feeling uncomfortable and weird about it. I mean, who would send shoes to you for free and for no purpose at all? What a weird situation. This happened a few days ago. I found a cell phone in the corner of my bed while cleaning my room. Of course, it was not mine, and it didn't belong to any of my friends either. So I turned on the cell phone to check what was in it, and I was left speechless. Well, I've never seen that cell phone while living in this house for several years. I found it just today. But when I checked the phone's recent call history, one was made just yesterday. If someone knows the answer to this, please let me know. What should I do with this cell phone now? It seems like growing a terrarium is in fashion now. But I threw out my terrarium a few days ago. One day, I bought a terrarium at a store. While heading home, I put it next to my bed and fell asleep. The next morning, I saw a girl lying next to me on my bed. And the scariest part was that her neck was halfway turned. But as soon as I jumped up screaming, she was already gone. At first, I thought it was just a nightmare or some kind of sleep paralysis. A few days later, I had a dream this time, and I was inside of the terrarium. I was on something like a big hill, and dolls made of bones were digging through the soil of the garden. As soon as I stepped closer, I could see the bones on the ground. Then I woke up from my dream in fright because I felt uncomfortable thinking about the woman I saw a few days ago. I went into the bathroom with a terrarium. I started taking all the plants and moss out of the glass. You know, moss is usually very easy to peel off. However, this one didn't come off easily. It was as if the roots of the plant grew so deep that it felt like they were stuck to the soil. I was about to turn on the water and wash the roots. And at that moment, little white pieces rattled and were drained on the sink. What was that? Suddenly I was struck with fear. I couldn't even think of washing it anymore. Eventually, I had to throw the plants outside. What were those white pieces? I saw what if they were real bone fragments. It happened when I was in middle school. One day, two of my classmates committed suicide together on the roof of an apartment complex. Everyone in the class wondered why they did that and felt sorry for them. And a few days later, we received a group photo from our school trip. The moment we looked closely, we found something unbelievable. Some of the students were screaming and some were crying. It was insane. When I looked at it, it was really, really weird. The two friends who committed suicide together were standing next to each other, and their eyes were looking upwards, the same exact way. It was strange enough to make the viewer feel unpleasant. Well, eventually, our teacher ended up burning the picture. What was up with that picture? I have no clue at all. This happened a week before my 19th birthday. I had invited 3 of my closest friends over to my place since my parents were out of town for a few days, and my sister had recently moved to the dorm. Well, anyway, 15 minutes later, my friends, Keith J. and Marcus, showed up at my door with a handful of beer for the perfect boys' night. We watched movies, chugged on some drinks, and even had an epic pillow fight until 10:45 p.m. That's when Keith suggested that we play an extreme truth or dare game to make this night a blast. The boys mostly preferred truth, which was hilarious, as they were compelled to answer embarrassing questions. But when it was my turn, I chose to do a dare they all discussed among themselves for a solid minute, until Jay finally dared me to dress up as a girl and walk outside. At first, I hesitated, but accepted it regardless. I found a blonde wig in the storage box, which was from last year's Halloween, and wore one of my sister's fancy dresses that she saved for special occasions. Then we went outside looking for some fellows to prank. And that's when the sight of a few guys smoking on their motorbikes caught my eye. They all looked like they were around in their mid-20s. I walked past them while my friends hid behind the bushes waiting for a reaction. Soon, I could tell that they were gazing at me. And when I glanced over to get a peek of them, I realized that they were all coming towards me. As they moved closer, one of them asked if I came here often, and if he could get my phone number. Too bad I'm a boy loser. I started laughing frantically as I removed my wig. However, they didn't seem to like this prank, and I figured that was a huge mistake I had made. Suddenly, he pulled out a pocket knife and said that I was gonna pay for that awful prank. Panicked, I instinctively kicked his left leg, making a run for it, as I heard the others starting their bikes up to chase me. All of my friends who witnessed that moment immediately headed back to the house to call 911. Meanwhile, I was shaking with fear as I further advanced toward the main road. Unfortunately, those punks ganged up on me, blocking my path, and I was thrown to the rough surface by a strong push. The guy I had kicked in the leg earlier got off his bike and pulled out his knife once again, with the creepiest grin I've ever seen on his face. "Do not ever prank on me, you bastard." When he was about to stab me, while I was screaming, I noticed that he abruptly stopped midway. There was a loud police siren near us. The volume of the sirens got louder, and finally they ditched me and ran away. I was laying on the road in pure shock. Luckily, I was rescued by my friends, who had informed the police right on time. We never encountered those guys anymore around our town, nor did we ever play that stupid game after that. I cannot imagine what would have happened to me if the cops were even just a minute later.